why self-awareness is the most attractive skill you can build. If there is one thing that separates men who keep growing from men who keep circling the same ground year after year, it is not talent. It is not looks. It is not even discipline in the way most people mean it. It is the willingness to see themselves clearly, not the version of themselves they present to the world, not the version they construct in their own heads to protect their ego from the harder truths. The actual version, the one that shows up under pressure, the one that surfaces in intimate moments, the one that makes certain decisions on autopilot and then rationalizes them afterward as if they were chosen deliberately. Most men live their entire lives at a comfortable distance from that version of themselves, and that distance costs them more than they will ever calculate. You have almost certainly met a man who seemed to have everything working against him on paper and yet drew people toward him anyway. He wasn't the most physically impressive person in the room. He didn't have the highest status or the most polished presentation, but there was something about being around him that felt different from most interactions. Something that made you feel genuinely met rather than assessed. Something that made you trust what he said because he never seemed to be saying it for effect. What you were responding to, without knowing it, was the quality of his relationship with himself. He had done the work of knowing who he was, not perfectly, not without blind spots, but deeply, enough that he was no longer performing. And the absence of performance is one of the most disarming things one human being can offer another. The reason most men never develop this quality is not laziness. It is that genuine self-awareness is consistently mislabeled. It gets filed under therapy, under sensitivity, under the category of things that make a man softer rather than stronger. This is one of the more damaging pieces of cultural misdirection a man can absorb, because it causes him to turn away from the one skill that would give him a cleaner read on every situation he walks into, every relationship he enters, every version of himself he keeps bumping up against and not understanding. Self-awareness is not about being more emotional. It is about being more accurate, and accuracy, in any domain, is power. This chapter is going to show you what genuine self-awareness actually looks like when it is functioning in a man's life, why it registers as deeply attractive to the people around you before they can consciously explain why, and what it costs you every single day that you navigate the world without it, not as an idea to consider, as a practice to begin. Start with something concrete. Imagine two men, both intelligent, both reasonably accomplished, both interested in the same woman. The first man has spent years cultivating the things he believes make him attractive. He is well-dressed, financially stable, funny in the way that lands in groups, physically in good shape. When he sits across from her, he is tracking everything. He notes when she laughs and files it away, as confirmation that he is doing well. He pivots his stories based on what seems to hold her attention. He manages the silences carefully, filling them before they can become awkward, steering the conversation back toward territory where he knows he comes across well. He is working very hard. She can feel how hard he is working, and that feeling, which she might describe as something being slightly off, is the precise sensation of being with someone who is more focused on their own reflection in her eyes than on her actual presence. The second man is not more impressive on paper, but when he sits across from her, something different happens. He asks her something and then actually listens to the answer, not to formulate his response, but because he is genuinely curious about what she will say. When the conversation moves into territory where he has a genuine opinion that might not land perfectly, he offers it anyway, without softening it into something safer. When he says something that doesn't quite work, he doesn't freeze or oversell the recovery. He just moves forward, unbothered, because his sense of himself doesn't hinge on every exchange going flawlessly. He is not tracking her reactions as a scoring system. He is just there, present, unguarded in the way that people who know themselves well tend to be unguarded. She doesn't think about why she finds this more compelling. She just does. The psychological principle embedded in this scene is not subtle once you name it. The first man is relating to her through the filter of his own image management. Every interaction is passing through the question, how is this making me look? The second man has done enough interior work that this question has become largely irrelevant to him in the moment. He knows who he is. He doesn't need the interaction to confirm it. And because he doesn't need it to confirm anything. He can actually be in it. This is what presence means at its most functional level. It is not a mood or a technique. It is what happens when a man's relationship with himself is settled enough that he is not constantly demanding that his external interactions do the settling for him. The misconception that blocks men from developing this is the belief that self-awareness is primarily about identifying your flaws and correcting them. This makes it sound like an audit, like a process of finding everything wrong with yourself and systematically fixing it. That framing is both exhausting and incomplete. Yes, knowing your patterns helps you interrupt the destructive ones, but genuine self-awareness is not predominantly about deficiency. It is about accuracy across the full picture. It means knowing what you genuinely value versus what you have convinced yourself you value because it earns approval. It means knowing the difference between the emotions you actually feel and the ones you perform because they are more acceptable. It means knowing what kind of environment brings out the version of you that you respect, and what kind of environment activates the version of you that you are not proud of. This full spectrum knowledge is what allows a man to make decisions that are actually aligned with who he is, rather than decisions that are aligned with who he is afraid of. Being perceived as, the reframe is this: stop thinking of self-awareness as introspection, as looking inward for the sake of understanding yourself better in isolation. Start thinking of it as calibration, as developing the most accurate possible instrument for reading every situation you encounter. A man who knows his own defaults under social pressure reads a room differently than a man who doesn't. A man who knows his own fear responses recognizes when he is making a decision from fear versus from genuine judgment. A man who understands his own attachment patterns does not get blindsided by the same dynamic in every close relationship. The knowledge is not just psychological. It is strategic. It makes you better at everything that requires accurate perception, which is nearly everything that matters. Here is the practice. It is uncomfortable and it is simple. After any interaction that carried some weight, any conversation with a woman you're interested in, any confrontation with a colleague, any moment where you felt something shift inside you and did not quite understand why, take a few minutes alone and ask yourself 3 things with no editing. What did I do in that exchange that came from a genuine place? Something I actually felt or actually believed. What did I do that was performance? Something shaped primarily by how I wanted to be seen. And what was I afraid of? Not in general terms, but specifically in that particular moment. The answers will not always be flattering. That is the point. The man who can ask these questions honestly and sit with the answers without immediately softening them is the man who stops making the same mistakes in new disguises. What accumulates over time through this kind of honest observation is something that cannot be faked or shortcut. It is a quality of steadiness that other people feel before they can explain it. The man who knows himself does not send mixed signals because he is not mixed up about who he is. He does not need to test people to feel secure because his security is not stored in other people's responses. He does not become someone slightly different depending on who is in the room because he is not assembling his identity from the approval of the room. He is the same man in every setting, not rigid, not closed, but grounded in something that does not shift with the social weather. That consistency is what trust is built on. That trust is what genuine attraction is built on, and neither of them is available to a man who is still a stranger to himself. There is a version of you that is not managing impressions, not scanning for approval, not adjusting the presentation based on what the room seems to want. That version is not softer than the one you usually show the world. He is considerably harder in the way that things with solid foundations are harder than things built to look solid from the outside. He makes decisions more cleanly. He speaks more directly. He wastes less energy on performances that cost him something real and deliver him something hollow. He is more attractive, more trustworthy, more genuinely influential, not because he has worked harder on his surface, but because he has done the harder and less visible work of understanding what is underneath it. Most men will read something like this and feel it land somewhere true, and then return to their lives and continue operating exactly as before, not because they are weak, because the pull of the familiar image, the one they have invested years in constructing, is very strong. Dismantling it even partially feels like a loss before it feels like a gain. This is the cost of the work, and it is real. The man who does it, anyway, who chooses the discomfort of honest self, examination over the comfort of a well-maintained illusion, is choosing a slower and less visible form of growth than most. Self-improvement promises, but it is the only kind that compounds everything you want from other people. The respect, the attraction, the genuine connection begins with the same thing. It begins with you being willing to know yourself honestly, enough that you no longer need them to tell you who you are. The man who knows himself that well has already become someone worth knowing.